My son Andy and I are going to paint the same apple with watercolor pencils. The thing is, Andy knows little about art, let alone watercolor pencils. With this short, informative demo, you're going to actually see what mistakes you might be making from looking at Andy's version, and I'll show you how I go about avoiding them. Andy's beginner's challenge is to paint an apple from a reference, and I was a little bit sneaky because I selected one with strong shadows to make one of the most important points you must know about watercolor pencils. Is he going to fall in the trap? I explained to him briefly to color first, then activate the paint with water, but I didn't get into too much detail. We'll be using the faber-castell Arbor watercolor pencils on ash paper. Andy, what is the first thing you want to remember as a watercolor pencil beginner?
Keep it simple.
That's right. And when you start, I recommend to choose something that's easy to paint, a single object like this apple, for example. The next step will be to gather a limited color palette so you don't overwhelm yourself with a bunch of colors. Here I picked yellow and red because these are the apple's main colors. They're my midtones. For the shadows, I went with a purple color. For highlights, I'll use a white colored pencil to make it simple. So Andy, tell us what's next once we have that.
Color with the midtones first.
Andy did really well here by blocking in both yellow and red on this apple. I noticed he started with the weakest one of the two, yellow, which is smart because red is quick to overpower yellow. So it's better to overlap red onto yellow as a next step, like both him and I actually did. Red will always show easily even if you have yellow in that spot. When yellow won't show easily if you add too much red there. It will at best look orange even if you try to add more yellow. That's why we're coloring first with yellow in this case, and we overlap red while keeping some of those yellowish parts that are visible in the reference untouched. There is something else you want to consider with watercolor pencils.
Build shape while coloring.
By that, I mean to color in the actual direction that the shape goes. For example, to make this apple look accurate in a painting, we need to convey that the shape is round and curvy. That is why we want to color in the way the apple is shaped, if that makes sense. It will guide us later to finish the realism. Andy was doing it a little bit towards the end of his coloring. When you look at my version of it, I take care to render the shape really well from the first coloring session. We both kept the shadow color for later, which I think is right this early in the painting since it's going to darken everything so much more. But still at this stage, you can see a nice apple coming to life already, and there is time to make changes if something seems off since the colors are fairly light. Andy was doing pretty good, but you'll see it's going to get more complicated as we add water, and this is because
it's better to activate light colors first.
This has to do with controlling the paints and making sure that the colors stay where you first place them. Andy activated red first and later yellow. It's not obvious yet, but you will see it will snowball into a bigger problem later when you do it that way. Notice how he also just picks up more water without ever rinsing the paintbrush or using the paper towel. Because of it, he ends up with a large blended area where you can still distinguish red and yellow. And again, right now, it doesn't pose a huge problem, colors being light. I also see a drying line on his painting because in watercolor pencil paintings, you don't need a ton of water, and adding a lot of it will create watercolor-like blooms or stain effects. In contrast, I found that the best way to keep coloring accurate after blending is to blend section after section from light to dark. So here from yellow areas moving into the red ones. And I'm careful to respect the shape and activate the paint as if I was actually doing it on a real apple and not a flat piece of paper. We already have something nice at this point, so what's the next step, Andy?
Start adding shadows.
Make sure to let the paper dry completely before coloring again, otherwise the marks will be obvious and really hard to blend. And then Andy asked me this question.
If I'm wet, I can't draw afterwards.
And I gave what I just told you away, so he made sure to dry the apple before he colored again. But I can tell you, I've had my local students make this mistake. And I say it's only a mistake when it's unintended because it can also create beautiful effects. Andy added more midtones and took the extra step of reactivating those a second time. I didn't need that because I had added enough pigment in the first place that my painting looked vibrant, and because I was blending, going section after section as I showed you. Then he added a few shadows. Problems I'm seeing here is that first, there wasn't enough of that to really contrast with red and yellow, like we see it in the reference. He also made a few isolated lines rather than keeping the coloring approach, and he didn't try and overlap more red and yellow on top. I also made lines, but in a way that connects them to the rest of the shadows. When I add such a strong color as blue or purple on top of light and bright colors like yellow and red, to keep that change gradual from dark to light and make sure I can catch a mistake later, I prefer to overlap colors, like red here, onto the shadow color, purple, because this will help create a gradient from the dark tone to the midtones more easily when we blend it. You can see now I really have an accurate drawing. So this is where things are going to get tricky now, and there's only one reason for that.
Activate shadows very carefully.
This is one of the most common watercolor pencil mistakes that will ruin a painting completely, and I will link a video to watch next where I show exactly what that looks like on a full landscape painting. When Andy blended his coloring, remember he didn't overlap other colors on top to ease the gradient. And that's why he's getting such a harsh transition between reds and purples. He told me later he was getting frustrated at this point, and I remember doing the same thing too when I started. Notice he only rinses his paintbrush once here. He also spent a lot of time trying to fix the areas he just activated. That's a problem because first, if you don't wash your paintbrush frequently when you blend dark colors like these, you'll keep adding that color wherever you go next. That's why I work with a paper towel in one hand and my paintbrush in the other. I go back and forth. Activate, rinse, get rid of the excess water, activate, rinse, etc. And always from light to dark. Hence the importance of overlapping the midtones onto the purple tones and not just looking at shadows. Imagine with all the pigment I had there, if I just blended everything in one go, the apple would have turned purple in some places and brownish in others. Notice also how I keep my strokes shaped like the apple is, and Andy did this pretty well too. It's important because I'm able to add details with excess shadow pigment where I need it and emphasize the shape of the apple in places. See also where it's too late to add the light colors afterwards, like I was saying earlier. Andy tried it here with yellow, but it can't show very well on top of these darker tones. After this, Andy obviously felt like he had no choice but try and fix the apple by adding more to it, but it didn't work as planned because the base he had created was already quite dark and the technique for blending shadows made it hard. If you need guidance on a project that's similar to this, my first watercolor pencil class on Skillshare was another apple with beautiful colors and cool texture effects, and that would be a great way to practice the principles I've talked about so far, so I'll link that in the description of the video.
Refine contrast, vibrancy, and details.
To work on a painting step by step and from light to dark will really help you adding those last touches to make it even better. I increased vibrancy in places and shadows in others, so in a way, like Andy, I added more to my apple myself, except I wasn't doing it for the same reason. And I used the same blending technique that I know will always keep the colors where I originally wanted them to be. Andy used the white pencil as I had told him to for the highlights, but he said he wasn't sure where to add them. And this has to do with an observation problem more than anything else. When you look at the photo, you will see the reflections towards the top. These are the ones we wanted to add. I told Andy to ignore the drops completely because I thought it would have been too overwhelming for a first painting. I added the white pencil on my version of the painting. I could have chosen something more visible than that, like white gouache, white watercolor, or a gel pen, but I was trying to keep things simple for him with just pencils. If you enjoyed this, you can see more in this video. I'll show you how I painted this more complex landscape using the principles from today's video. Thank you for watching and see you next time.